Hello ladies, gentlemen, teachers, students. My name is Elena Day, and today I'm going to talk to you about some issues. Social issues is a very broad term, so let's bring it back to one in particular, which is false imprisonment. Now, where did this idea of mine come along to talk to you about this, you may ask? Well, in my scholarly studies, I've stumbled across the book The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, in which the protagonist is falsely imprisoned. This isn't just something that comes from a book, it's something that could happen on a day-to-day basis without us even knowing it. But before getting into the reality of this issue, let's talk a bit about this book. To begin, The Count of Monte Cristo partakes in mainly France and a little bit of Italy. We are introduced to Edmond Dantes, who is an illiterate sailor. He just returned from a long trip at sea, and upon the return of this journey, Dantes is made the new captain of his ship, making his best friend, Fernand, very jealous. So Fernand, being the typical best friend, being jealous of his friend, does what any normal man would do. He throws his friend in jail. Now, unlike today, where most people would just tweet about it, "Oh my god, you can't give me anything to have to myself, you're so rude. Hashtag you suck." He can't just be normal, he can't just let it go, so he throws his best friend into prison. Now, there was a slight reason for this because Dantes carried back a letter from Napoleon Bonaparte, which was apparently harmless, but Fernand read it and there was war tactics on it to be delivered to someone in France. And it was just Dantes' luck that that person to be delivered to was his prosecutor's father. If it wasn't for the fact that that letter Dantes carried was going to be brought to the prosecutor's father, he might have gotten away with it. And in this quote, it shows the scene very well. To whom is it addressed? To Monsieur Notre Rue Coq-Heron in Paris. Had a thunderbolt fallen into the room? Villefort could not have been more stupefied. He sank into his seat and hastily turning over the packet drew forth the fatal letter, at which he glanced with an expression of terror. So this is where the false imprisonment comes in the story. Dantes is thrown into jail for no reason, he's done no wrong, but it's for A, his friend's jealousy, and B, his prosecutor wanted to keep his name clean. While in prison, Dantes learned how to read and write by a professor that he stumbled upon, and they both agreed that they would help each other escape. Now that Dantes was a free man, he decided the best thing to do was take revenge on all the people that wronged him. So, first his best friend and that prosecutor. So, Dantes now made himself a count, the Count of Monte Cristo. He became very wealthy as he stumbled into a hidden treasure. And with his knowledge, he could act the part. Once Dantes is rediscovered as the Count of Monte Cristo, his old friend Fernand rediscovers him and again wants to throw him into jail as seeming to be a threat. But before that could all occur, the Count was one step ahead of them and locked away the prosecutor by getting him to admit he falsely locked away Dantes and that he also killed his father. The streak of revenge continues as Dante gets back at all who did him wrong, and eventually he gets back at Fernand, and in the end, first he ruined his reputation, then his life, and then he took it. They ended up having a sword duel to the death, and that's where this famous quote comes. When Dantes is about to fight Fernand, Fernand realizes who the Count really is, and asks how he escaped, and Dantes simply replies, "How did I escape? With difficulty. How did I plan this moment? With pleasure." After Dantes has gotten all of the revenge he seeked and able to put his heart at peace, he's able to live on with his life and move on from all of this. Now, this may seem like a drastic case to some, but there are true stories out there that occurred like this. A prime example of this comes from a memoir of Marina Nemat. She wrote a book called The Prisoner of Tehran. She grew up in Iraq when the revolution started back in the 1980s, where women would have to wear full-covered headdresses. If you wore makeup, you were considered to worship Satan, and such offenses as not fully covering or trying to enhance one's beauty could be punishable by death. Marina was arrested on many occasions, but the first came about when she was only in high school, and she led many of her fellow students into a strike. This occurred because the politics of Iraq started to flood into their school, and their teachers wouldn't even teach the proper subjects. They would merely only talk about politics. Marina stood up one day and told her teacher, asking her if she could actually teach the lesson rather than bring politics in. And her teacher replied, "If you don't like it, you can leave." And Marina stood up and got out of class along with many other students. After a few days of this, the principal had enough, and after not being able to detain the girls herself, she threatened to have the Revolutionary Guards taken in, who would not be so lenient to the girls' actions. From that threat, here's the actual quote that Marina wrote in her memoir. Her face red with anger, she said she was giving us a final warning. She told us if we didn't go back to class, she'd have no other choice but to ask the Revolutionary Guards to come to her school and take matters into their hands. The Revolutionary Guards had a bad reputation. During previous months, they had arrested hundreds of people, many of whom had never been heard from again. Their crimes had been being anti-revolutionary, anti-Islam, or anti-Khomeini. In this first instance, Marina managed to avoid her arrest, but later on in her life, she was in fact arrested. And for many years, she was then being locked up or threatened with death just in order to keep her quiet, in order to prevent rebellious actions.
Another case of false imprisonment actually occurred in Canada. Now, false imprisonment doesn't just have to be someone, like I said, being thrown away in order to keep them quiet. It can be someone who suffered consequences of false imprisonment because the court didn't do a proper job analyzing the entire case and looking through the evidence, making someone falsely accused for a crime they never even committed. The case I'm going to talk to you about is the case of James Driscoll, who was falsely accused for shooting his friend several times in the chest. Driscoll ended up being charged with life in prison, but a few years after the charges were laid, his case was reinvestigated and they realized that they had in fact falsely accused Driscoll for this crime. From that day, here's a quotation from the RCMP. The RCMP said 3 hair samples found in Driscoll's van were Harder's, and that evidence convicted him. Later test results from the UK found that none of the hairs belonged to Harder. The inquiry final report released in February 2007 said the jury in Driscoll's trial was seriously misled on issues including the reliability of a key Crown witness. The report also said the failure of the Crown to disclose information to the defense was careless indifference. There are many cases of false imprisonment, as you can see, whether it be fictional, as in the Count of Monte Cristo, or in real life, like the cases of Marina Nemat and James Driscoll. One of them was either locked away for completely false reasons in order just to keep them out of the scene and not have to deal with them anymore. And others were just simply a mistake of the court. I guess the big question after all this said is, how does one prevent this? Well, obviously the first step is awareness to know that this does occur. With someone being falsely charged like James Driscoll was, there isn't really much one can do rather than enforce that the court goes further into every investigation, and before a final decision is made, know that every single square inch of evidence has been looked over and looked over again very thoroughly. But as for cases such as Edmond Dantes and Marina Nemat, there personally isn't really much that we can do. Besides, like I said, just be aware that this does happen. So why not ask yourself, what could we do in order to help people that are being accused under such harsh terms but have really done nothing wrong? So if you have any ideas, leave them in the comments section below, and who knows, maybe we'll have some prize winners down there. Thanks everyone for just listening to me speak today about this terrible issue. I hope that all this has opened up your mind a bit to what really lies out there and the issue that this really does take place. It is not just a thing of fiction, it is real. So your feedback, anything would really help. Anything really helps in this case. Thank you.